glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. I've known Kara for quite a long time. I think we first met when she was in graduate school, possibly. And so she is.
Oh, it looks like Tiger froze. Well, we are really excited you're here. We're excited Kara's here. We're going to hand it over to her because I know that you're all eager to hear what she has to share from the research that she's done. So, Kara, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Rebecca and Tiger. It really is an honor to be here with you. And I pretty much never say no to anything Tiger asks me to do. And there's a long list of reasons for that. But maybe number one is, Tiger, you have been a tireless cheerleader and advocate for women in leadership. And when I was in my 20s and you were a little bit older than me, you and other men and women, but you especially, were so supportive of me and a number of other women in youth ministry that you were getting to know. And so thank you for all the doors you have opened for women in leadership in general and youth ministry specifically. So it's an honor to be here with you all. And I'm looking forward to sharing content for maybe 30 minutes or so. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions where we can talk about anything that I've already talked about related to three big questions, or if you have other things you want to discuss, we can go there. There's nothing that's off limits from my perspective. So three big questions that change every teenager. If you're seeing the slides, give me a thumbs up so that I know. Okay, great. So we're good to go on the slides. I love young people, and in so many ways, young people are like walking bundles of questions. Maybe middle schoolers more than anybody else. And I was leading a small group with middle school girls, and one of them came up to me before our small group started, and she had one of her friends on either arm, and she said, "Kara, I've got a question." She said, "What's a prostitute?" And the girls on either side of her kind of giggled a little nervously. And then she said, no, wait, that's not it. It's something that we are at this church. And I said, "Do you mean a Protestant?" And she said, yeah, that's what I mean. So, prostitute, Protestant, whatever you want to make out of that. But young people are just walking around with questions. And we're going to look at three big questions that we think are at the heart of young people's long list of questions. But I want to start by defining who young people are. And we at the Full Youth Institute, we love leaders like you who are investing in young people, and we love young people themselves. And so much of the research and terms we're familiar with really have to do with millennials, those that were born before 2000. Gen Z, those who were born after 2000, say up to 2020, those are the teenagers that we're working with. And so we wanted to try to define, what is Gen Z like? Can we distill all that we know about Gen Z into a Cliff Notes version, or as young people would say today, a Spark Notes version that can help us just have a quick handle on who they are? And so first, I got to say, young people are anxious. Young people are anxious. Mental health rates across generations. Anxiety has tripled, depression has quadrupled, and young people are bearing such a brunt of that. I don't know a family with teenage girls that's not dealing with stress and anxiety. And by the way, I have teenage girls, so I count myself in that. I don't know a family with teenage girls that's not dealing with stress and anxiety, and teenage boys are just a nose behind teenage girls. So this is an anxious generation. This is an adaptive generation. They are so creative, they're so innovative, they're so entrepreneurial. They want to use their skills and their gifts and talents to make a mark on our world, which is something to really celebrate. And this is a diverse generation. diverse in so many ways, but let's just look at race and ethnicity. According to census data, half of those young people under 18 are now young people of color. So half are young people of color and half are white. In the overall population, it's about 2/3 white, 1/3 people of color. But for young people, we've already crossed a line where half of those under 18 are kids of color. So periodically, we want to give you a chance to reach out for that keyboard, reach out to that phone, and respond with an answer. And so we're going to ask you a few questions during the course of our time together. Which of these three words, anxious, adaptive, or diverse, best describes the young people that you are closest to? Which of these three words, anxious, adaptive, or diverse, best describes the young people that you are close to? Okay, I see anxious is leading the way, also diverse, anxious hands down. Yes, anxious, wow, anxious, anxious, anxious. Whew, adaptive. Okay, we're seeing a little bit of adaptive. Another adaptive. So it's interesting that these three words are cutting across the young people that we're closest to. But maybe anxious is the number one. And I gotta say, I've noticed this anecdotally. I've heard from a lot of families that back to school here in January, that has raised young people's stress and anxiety. They had a couple weeks off for Christmas, really enjoyed that winter break, but then back to school came and their anxiety and stress is maybe even higher than it was before the holidays. So if today's generation is the most anxious, adaptive, and diverse generation we've ever seen, which I think is fair to say, we certainly have data on it being the most anxious and most diverse, then what if we could be the most empathetic adults ever? What if we could be the adults who don't judge this generation, who don't point our fingers at this generation, but who journey with this generation and really understand them? Part of what drove the research that I'm going to share a little bit more about in a moment is what we heard from this 15-year-old, where he said, "I'm tired of the church answering questions I'm not asking." Oh, it's like an arrow to my heart. And it's so true. I'm tired of the church answering questions I'm not asking. So often we are missing the strike zone of what young people care about most. And so, in large part, thanks to a grant from the Lilly Endowment, we wanted to study what are the questions that boil beneath the daily questions young people are asking. If on a daily level, they're wondering about social media, friendship, what to wear, what's happening with their college applications for those who are in 12th grade right now. You know, if that's what's happening that we see, what are the big questions beneath those more daily felt need questions? And so we assembled a very diverse research team of grad students, of scholars. Almost everybody, if not everybody in this picture, is in youth ministry or has been in youth ministry. We on purpose gathered a very ethnically diverse team. And what we did is we did over 100 hours of interviews with 27 teenagers. So spent roughly 4 to 6 hours with each teenager, not all in one sitting. Okay, we broke it up into 2 or 3 sittings. And we intentionally looked to get as many ethnic backgrounds as possible represented. So of the 27 teenagers, 7 were white and the rest were kids of color. And then we paired that kind of deep analysis with a broad analysis, over 2,000 interviews, surveys, and focus groups that we had done. And out of that research, as well as time spent with scholars at Fuller, we identified these 3 big questions. So the cat's out of the bag. Here's the punchline of what we're talking about. We're going to unpack this for the rest of our time together. But we think the 3 big questions that change every young person are identity, who am I? Belonging, where do I fit? And purpose, what difference can I make? So identity, belonging, and purpose. Who am I? Where do I fit? What difference can I make? Now, let me say, these are questions that all of us wrestle with. These are not just young people questions. These are people questions. But for those of us over 30, these questions tend to be on a low simmer. For those under 30, these questions tend to be at a rolling boil. And really, any time of transition, these questions tend to heat up. And so that's where adolescence, young adulthood, it's kind of permanent transition. And so that's why these questions are so heated for our young people. Now, we're going to talk about these questions as 3 distinct questions, but just know there's a lot of overlap. Identity shapes belonging, which shapes purpose, and on it goes. So these 3 questions definitely relate to each other. Part of what's great about living in Los Angeles is we get to spend time with people in the entertainment industry. And as we've tested these ideas, identity, belonging, and purpose, with folks in the entertainment industry, many of them will say, the difference between a great script and a mediocre script is, are they wrestling with identity, belonging, or purpose? The difference between a great movie or TV series and a mediocre one is how much they're wrestling with these core questions. So This Is Us, I'm so sad that show went off the air. I mean, it's all about identity, belonging, and purpose. The Marvel Universe, it's all about identity, belonging, and purpose. The Office, which it's just so humorous to me that The Office is one of teenagers' favorite shows as they stream it. Even though teenagers have never worked in an office, they're drawn to The Office. Sure, there's a lot of comedy there, great writing. And every episode, there are questions of identity, belonging, and purpose. So we're going to start by looking at young people's current answers to these questions. What is it that they are currently saying, or how are they acting currently to answer these questions? And then we're going to look at Jesus's best answers. So, and I'm going to make this more personal by letting you hear from young people themselves. So 12th grade Rebecca, she is a white student from the South. She typifies this idea that young people are often defining themselves by what others expect. And she said, I really, really, really cared what other people thought. I was whatever I wanted to be for you and you and you. And as she said that, the interviewer said she kind of pointed to imaginary audiences. So young people are really driven to define themselves by what others expect. What's challenging is that these expectations often conflict. So Claudia is a Latina in 12th grade, and she talks about how she's navigating different worlds. It is really tiring going between my Latino and Korean friends at school. It's just so exhausting. And she described how, as an 11th grader, she actually had a breakdown from bouncing back and forth among these young people. And by the way, we changed the names on all these kids, so these are not their actual names. And in the midst of conflicting and multiple external expectations, young people end up feeling not blank enough. So 9th grade Natalie, who's a half black, half white young woman, she talked about, this is silly, but I have a favorite pair of jeans. People are like, wow, did you get skinnier? I walk around confidently in those jeans. Because Natalie doesn't generally feel thin enough. Those jeans make her feel thin enough. But young people are walking around feeling not popular enough, not athletic enough, not smart enough, not talented enough, not attractive enough, and on it goes. So external expectations and feeling like they're not enough are 2 of the primary current answers that young people are using for the question of identity. Let's go to belonging. The second question. It was so fascinating. I think every young person we interviewed used the word safe. Safe. Young people feel like they belong when they feel safe. 12th grade Haley said, sometimes it's overwhelming to try to be a friend, and I think I can't say this or I can't do that. They're not going to like me. So Haley is describing times when she didn't feel safe. When we would ask young people when they felt safe, for a lot of young people it was with friends, some it was at church, some at home, some at their job, some at their basketball team, but it was feeling safe, and especially safe to be themselves. Something else that was interesting about young people's sense of belonging, and I've never thought about this before. I've been doing youth ministry for over 3 decades, a really long time. Not as long as Tiger, but a really long time. And young people also feel like they belong if they share an experience or a preference. So this is 12th grade Steve, and this quote just breaks my heart because it's an example of not sharing an experience. 12th grade Steve talks about the basketball team. The team hangs out and I don't get invited. I would love to hang out with the guys, I just haven't been invited. So he's sharing this experience of being on the basketball team, and yet it's not translating into feeling belonging. Other students talked about, they feel like they belong with those who are in their AP Calc class, with those who they work with the kids in their neighborhood, etc. So Steve shares an experience and doesn't feel like he belongs, but typically when young people were sharing an experience, they would feel like they belong. So safety and sharing are two of the big ways that young people currently answer that question. Let's go to purpose. When do young people feel like they have a sense of purpose or when they're making a difference? And this is 11th grade Sebastian, who's a Latino on the West Coast. He describes his church. My church gives me tasks they wouldn't give to most 17-year-olds. I have the security code. I have the key. I'm in charge of offering. That's pretty big. Some of us adults are like, dang, we're not in charge of offering. And yet this church is letting 11th grade Sebastian be in charge of offering. Across the board, the 27 students that we interviewed, they were all serving. Now, these kids were all from youth groups. And so certainly I'm not saying 100% of US teenagers are serving, but it was encouraging how much helping others was part of how they feel like they're making a difference. And yet part of what's overwhelming is that there are lots of options for serving. And so this is, again, 12th grade Claudia, a Latina, who describes how many options she was encountered when it comes to her future. I love this. I wanted to be a vet, but then I saw a documentary about a lady who died because this cat with a virus scratched her. I was like, no, I am not trying to die. Just love teenagers. So then I was interested in being a lawyer, but the law changes every week. So no, that's not it. Then I realized I like to talk about what's going on in the world. So I thought I could pursue writing and journalism. That way I can motivate people to take action, like with the burning of the Amazon rainforest. So now that's what I want to do. So Claudia had all these different options and finally landed on sharing about the Amazon rainforest. Without knowing it, sometimes we in the church, we put pressure on young people to understand God's will for them as part of a sense of purpose. Here's what Lily, again, all names changed, said, I have a career in mind that I want to do, but I don't know if that's what God wants for me. What if I pursue it and ends up not being God's best for me? I will have spent 4 years studying something only to scrap it and start all over. I have always been told that our purpose as humans is to advance God's kingdom. And I want to do that, but I'm stressed because I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. I heard a great talk by Louis Giglio where he talked about how we talk about God's will and how do we know God's will, and folks, that's certainly important. But then we use an interesting phrase. Not only do we want to know God's will, we want to be in the center of God's will. Like somehow being a few degrees off center is not as good as being in the center of God's will. I'm sure I've said that phrase, 100 times, and I'm trying now not to say it because I think it just puts more pressure on all of us. We got to figure this out. We got to figure this out. And instead of relaxing and trusting in God. So these are young people's current answers. And let's talk now about how these questions, identity, belonging, and purpose, can fuel the ministry that we do, can fuel the ways that we love and serve teenagers. So first off, I have really good news. Jesus offers the best answers to these questions. Jesus, the gospel, scripture, they all offer better answers, the best answers to these questions. The only answers that really satisfy. And in fact, we at the Full Youth Institute, we're starting to conceptualize discipleship or formation as moving from our current answers. I've just given you the current answers that we saw in young people for identity, belonging, and purpose, to more Jesus-centered answers. That's the process all of us are on. That's the process I'm on in my own identity, belonging, and purpose journey, is really leaning into Jesus's best answers for me. Your ministry and the gospel have exactly what young people need. Amen, amen. My Pentecostal roots are showing here a little bit. Like, yes, thank you, Lord. The gospel offers the best answers. And so what we did at Fuller is we wanted to come up with a really simple way to distill Jesus' answer to these three questions into short sentences and even one word. And so I'm going to offer you one word, short sentences for each of the three. But let me just say, you all have your own theologies. And so use these as a springboard and come up with something that better fits your tradition, maybe better fits what your students are experiencing. So when it comes to identity, so I offer these and then I'm sure you can improve them for your context. Identity, this who am I question. In the midst of young people feeling like they don't measure up, we want young people to know that they are enough because of Jesus. They are enough because of Jesus. In fact, they are more than enough. Jesus makes us more than enough. And so that word, to know that Jesus is sufficient, Jesus makes us more than enough. That's the single word, and that's the simple sentence that we would want to offer to young people for their identity questions. Let's move to belonging. Belonging, I belong with God's people. I belong with God's people in a world that often separates us, especially in US culture that's so individualistic. We best belong when we're with God's people in the midst of a world that offers conditional acceptance, conditional likes, literally conditional likes on our social media platforms. God's people ideally offer unconditional acceptance. And so the single word is with, and the sentence is, I belong with God's people. And then purpose. We're invited into God's great story. We're invited into God's great story. I had the chance to speak at my 12th grader's baccalaureate at her school. And she was okay with me speaking, but said, but Mom, I got to read over your talk before you give it. And I said, absolutely, I'm totally good with that. So she did. She gave me the green light to share this big idea that it's like each of us have a page in a metaphorical book that God is creating. And young people have written, a paragraph of that page, and they have the rest of that page to write. And we get to accompany. I love how our Catholic friends use that word, accompany. We get to accompany young people as they continue to fill out that page with what it means to be part of God's story. So story is the single word, and God invites us into God's great unfolding story. It's not about what college you go to. It's not about how much money you make. It's not about the car you drive, the house you're in. It's about being part of God's unfolding story. So enough with story. These are the three words. And again, please improve these for your context, but we offer these as an initial take for you to build on. What's fascinating, as we found as we've been toying and pulling on these three questions more, is that each one of us and our students, we have a question that leads the way. We have a question that is our default, that is the way that we tend to respond to the world. Maybe that's an area of insecurity for us where God is growing us. So my husband, he's a real purpose guy. In fact, we were just talking about this a couple of days ago, and this has been true of our whole almost 25 years of marriage, that when he hears of a need, he wants to grab a hammer and book a plane ticket. Like whatever's going on in the world, he wants to go and be part of God's story. Others of you might have that same default yourself. Maybe purpose leads the way for you. For me, honestly, identity is my biggest area of insecurity. I often feel like I'm not enough. Not so much in the professional or leadership part of my world. That is not an area of insecurity for me at this point. Maybe it was in my 20s more. But I feel like I'm not enough as a mom. As a mom. I know my own struggles and weaknesses as a mom, and I feel like I'm not enough. And I pray every day for myself that I will know that Jesus makes me enough. Like I need to embrace that prayer. So which of these three areas, identity, belonging, or purpose, leads the way for you, is primary for you? Again, it might be your default, it might be your area of struggle. Maybe you're a belonging person. You look at life through the lens of relationship and how can I be with people? That's awesome. Maybe you're about purpose. You love tangibly serving, being involved in justice work, sharing your faith. Maybe identity is more where you're going. Like I said, knowing that I'm enough. So again, if you would lean forward, touch that keyboard, touch that cell phone. I see purpose. Okay, interesting. Used to be identity and purpose, but now focused on belonging. Wonderful. Identity, purpose, belonging. So far, we seem pretty well split among these three. Um, identity, yeah, belonging, identity, yeah. So this is something really good to know about ourselves. And let me just say, as you're thinking about your own growth, we have the opportunity. My slides are not advancing. Here, oh, there we go. We have the opportunity to use enough width and story as a prayer skeleton. I've just started doing this about 2 months ago. I was reading a book by Shauna Niequist that invited folks, especially parents, to pray a few words for their kids. And so I got a blank journal page and I sat down in like November and I said, okay, Lord, what should I pray for my 3 kids who are 22, 20, and 16? And literally in about 7 seconds, I ended up writing down the words enough, width, and story. And so as I pray for my kids, as I take a prayer walk most mornings, as I'm sitting in my blue couch and journaling with my kids, as I'm on the road like I am now in a hotel room in Denver, enough, width, and story are a great prayer skeleton. I used to pray for my kids holistically by praying for them emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, and socially. And what I realized is enough, width, and story actually capture all of that. And so I've switched to praying for myself, my kids, and my husband through enough, width, and story and the various nuances of that. So I'm also starting to think about it as a team developmental paradigm. So I haven't done this yet. I'm just starting it, but I'm offering you an untested idea. But with the people who report to me at Fuller, I want us to talk about, in our one-on-ones, how is God growing you in your identity, belonging, and purpose? How are you learning more things about what it means to know that Jesus makes you enough, or you belong with God's people, you're part of God's story? I think that could make some really good coaching conversations with the people who report to me, and then have that trickle down throughout the whole branch of Fuller that I ultimately oversee. So these are just some ways that enough, width, and story are better answers, and that we can use in prayer, in how we are coaching and discipling people and helping them move to Jesus's best answers. Let's move now to the second way that these great questions can fuel our ministry, and that is by helping us have better conversations. So I'm going to share next the most depressing research for me during the whole pandemic when it comes to young people in the US. This is the most depressing research. It comes from Springtide Research Institute, that only 10% of young people heard from a religious leader during the first year of the pandemic. Only 10% heard from any religious leader. It was a sample of 13 to 25-year-olds. Any religious leader, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Mormon, etc. Only 1 out of 10 young people heard from a religious leader. And that, by the way, isn't just a pastor. It was defined as a pastor or someone who's influential in a faith community. That's the really depressing news. Like, I'm not sure if I'm more sad or mad about that. I'm really kind of both. But here's the good news, is that in that same sample, if you can call us post-pandemic, whatever stage of the pandemic we're in, 70% of those young people say that they won't take relationships for granted. Friends, I think we're in a divine window to share the gospel and to build relationships with young people who've been through social isolation, who've been through social distance, who are feeling a little relationally starved and are hungry for an adult who understands their identity, belonging, and purpose quests, to journey with them. We've seen this in action in our research. In a previous study we did on churches that were growing young, we looked at churches that aren't aging or shrinking, but are doing great work with young people. And there was a church in Pennsylvania. And we were going to visit the church, but before we visited the church, we did a bunch of interviews, focus groups. And when we asked young people what they love about their church, they kept talking about Bill, how much they love Bill. And teenagers would say, you know, Bill is showing up to soccer games and sitting on the bleachers. And young adults would say, Bill's swinging by my dorm room. Bill's coming by where I work and taking me out for coffee. Bill is just amazing. And so we thought as a research team, like, we can't wait to meet Bill. And so when we get to Pennsylvania and finally meet Bill, it turns out Bill is over 70 years old. And Bill remembers being a young person where there was nobody sitting in the stands for him. There was nobody cheering him on. And so Bill has resolved that that is not going to happen to the young people at his church. And so he is committed to showing up and being in the bleachers for young people, literally or metaphorically. And in fact, Bill said, you know, and not only am I doing it, I'm recruiting other adults, especially senior adults, to cheer on young people. And he said, I've even written like this one pager that invites them to be part of this vision. And we said, well, that sounds awesome, Bill. We'd love to see that one pager. And so he sent it to us by faxing it to us from the local public library. Okay. So, I mean, that is how Bill rolls. And Bill exemplifies, when it comes to better conversations with young people, Bill exemplifies what we heard from one senior pastor, that warm is the new cool. Warm is the new cool. Now, some of you are watching this and you are cool, and that's awesome. You just be your cool selves. For the rest of us who aren't cool, in fact, I will say that somewhere my kids are just shuddering because they would say that the way that I even say cool betrays that I am not cool. But for the rest of us, this is good news. We don't have to be cool. We can be warm. And as we understand these identity, belonging, and purpose questions, that opens doors for better conversations. Here's what we heard from one young person in a research study. You can download good preaching, but you can't download good mentoring. Folks, young people can download better sermons than you or I will ever give. What they can't download in the same way is live synchronous mentoring. Some fascinating data when it comes to better conversations, the kind of conversations we want to have as we mentor young people. This is also from Springtide. 58% of young people ages 13 to 25 said, I do not like to be told answers about faith and religion. I'd rather discover my own answers. And 54% report, religious communities try to fix my problems instead of just being there for me. So young people don't necessarily want us to come in with the answers or the solutions to their problems. They want us to journey, or again, accompany them as they try to figure that out. So one of our rule of thumbs is, and this relates to 3 big questions, is as we're mentoring young people and having conversations, never make a statement if you can ask a question instead. Always be thinking, instead of making a statement or a sentence, how can I ask a question? And in particular, we recommend this 3-question paradigm. Yes, we really like the number 3, apparently, Trinity and all that. But I keep this in my hip pocket as I'm talking to young people, because this is a great progression of how to ask questions. Start with now. Listen for what's going on now. What is that young person wrestling with? Go a level deeper in what they're wrestling with. Think to yourself, how does it connect with identity, belonging, and purpose? You may never say the words identity, belonging, and purpose to that young person, but you're thinking about it. And let me just say that I have found with the young people in our home and other young people I know, whenever they're doing something that doesn't make sense, feels unlike them, when I stop and ask, what are they after? Are they after identity, belonging, or purpose? It's like the penny drops. All of a sudden, those attitudes or actions that just feel askew from who that young person normally is make sense when I realize, oh, they're hungry for one of these 3 things. So listen for what's going on now. Ask yourself, what is it that they're really hungry for? Wonder with them about a better answer. There's a great question from Spiritual Direction that I'd suggest here. What is God inviting you to? Like God inviting in the midst of what you're experiencing, in the midst of this anxiety, in the midst of the conflict at home. In the midst of whatever struggle you're in, what is God inviting you to? And then how can you move forward and just take a step or two to live out what God's inviting you to? So now, God, or how? A couple helpful phrases as we're trying to have better conversations. I'm curious. I'm curious what you think is going on with these feelings that you have. Like, I find that when I start a phrase or a question with "I'm curious," it lowers young people's defensiveness. And then tell me more. Tell me more. This is a great phrase, and in fact, I know a family where they actually have this sign in their living room. It says, "Tell me more," because they want young people in their home and friends of their own kids to just being open to saying more. Well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what you're struggling with in math class or whatever it might be. So in our last 3 minutes, and then we'll get to Q&A, I want to talk about better gatherings. So we've looked at better answers, we've looked at better conversations. How can these questions, identity, belonging, or purpose, help you have better gatherings with young people? It starts by asking this question: what do the young people in your faith communities most need? What is it that they're most hungry for? A sense of identity, a sense of belonging, or a sense of purpose? And I'm going to give you one last chance to reach out to your keyboard, reach to your phone, reach to your tablet. What is it that the young people in your community most need? Is it identity? Is it belonging? Is it purpose? Where do you feel like, gosh, if I could turn the dial on just one of these, ideally we're always keeping in mind all three, but okay, belonging, I see. Thanks for getting the ball rolling. Wonderful. Belonging. Oh, belonging. Wow. Belonging. My goodness. Okay, there's an identity and belonging. So identity. This is interesting. So belonging is leading the way so far among us, with identity being number two. Some of my psych colleagues actually think that belonging is the first among equals for all generations, but maybe especially young people, that it's kind of the tip of the arrow of the three. And so, yeah, absolutely. The pandemic has really fractured relationships. Kids are walking around still in a relational deficit with peers and with adults. And so that's a big part of why they need identity. But then I'm belonging. But then identity, I mean, so many developmental psychologists have pointed to identity as a key, or sometimes the key task of adolescence. And then for those of you who would put purpose down, like, I think this generation, they're hungry to make a mark on the world around them. So again, the key is know your young people. Tiger and I, we can't tell you what your young people need. You know that. So prayerfully reflect on that. This is a church in Southern California. Nancy's the youth leader, that when she asked that question, what she felt like young people needed was a sense of purpose. And so she went to them and said, you know what, I've been doing ministry to you and for you, and instead it should be done with you and by you. So I am handing you the keys. She said, you're in charge of Sundays, you're in charge of midweeks, you're in charge of service activities, you're in charge of field trips like this one, where they went to an art studio to reflect on God as a creator and what that means for them as people who are created in God's image. The young people, they were a little skittish at first, but they ended up really loving having those keys, to the point that when the church had a business meeting, not only did young people attend, but they came with amendments they wanted to suggest. So that's how seriously they took this sense of belonging. This is a church in Chicago, and Aaron at the time was the youth pastor. He's in the back wearing glasses. Like many of you, he felt like his group needed a sense of belonging. It's a large church, and before the pandemic, there were 200 high school students who were attending. Pandemic hits, they go on Zoom, drops to 100, which is really typical, 50% drop in youth ministry attendance. And Aaron and his team felt like, okay, belonging is what we need to focus on. And so they turned the dial on small groups. And small groups, instead of getting 5% of the ministry's attention, got 95% of the ministry's attention. And it really did make a difference in belonging. This group that had been 200 and dropped to 100 ended up growing to 400 kids who were in small groups because they were hungry for that sense of belonging. So both these stories that I just told you, they were actually part of cohorts that we did as part of 10 by 10, which is a national discipleship collaborative that we're in testing, piloting mode now, but you can be part of testing these resources that will go live and national, be national this fall. And so we are partnering with youth ministry consultants. Rebecca has just put a web page in the chat where you can go to find out more, because these cohorts are going to reflect on identity, belonging, and purpose, and help you really journey with young people, as well as help you partner with parents to help you develop the team of volunteers and small group leaders you've always wanted. We spend plenty of time on your own faith formation, your own identity, belonging, and purpose, because that's so key in how we pour into others. So we'd love to have you be part of this new cohort that starts in February. So now is the time to reach out. It's, I think, 8 weeks, very doable, and you'll journey together in community with some good coaching. So
I also
Rebecca,
want to add on that. Part of the way Youth Ministry Consultants is structured is we want to make these resources accessible to all of you, regardless of your budget, regardless of your church size. So we're offering this at a fraction of the cost that it typically would be. And on top of that, we have scholarships available. And so if you're feeling like budget's an issue, please don't let that stop you. You can go and register and pay later. We'll figure it all out. So yeah, we hope you join us.
So just like we say to young people about winter camp, don't let money be the reason for you not to come. We can figure out the money part. So we just want you to be part of this important training and know that what we learn from you is going to help shape some resources we'll be sharing more nationally. So you can really be part of creating something pretty innovative. So.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so thankful for what you shared. I have furious notes that I'm going to use at home in ministry. I mean, it was just wonderful information. One of our core beliefs is that your ministry looks different for your unique context. And so I love that we have a chance now to ask the questions that you're really wrestling with and get those answers. So go ahead and put things in the chat if there were things that you were hoping we would talk about. If you want to go deeper on a certain point that Kara made, we'd love to know what those are. Welcome back, Tiger. It's good to have you.
Well, yeah, I just died over here with the internet. I don't know what happened, but restarted everything and now we're back.
Kara, I'll start with the first question while people get those in there. A lot of times youth workers get fully on board with these ideas, but struggle with how to get the rest of the church there. Are there some tips that you have for how do we help others come along with us in these ideas?
Great question, Rebecca. And that's part of what we're going to be studying in the cohort. Because I think a lot of times as youth pastors, we know what needs to change. It's just hard to know how to change, especially change outside of the youth ministry. I will just share a couple principles we've found as we've worked with hundreds of churches to implement change in the youth ministry and beyond. First, I love the definition of vision that my colleague Scott Cormode has come up with, and I will actually put it in the chat since it's easy for me to chat now that I'm not sharing screen. Vision is shared stories of future hope. Vision is shared stories of future hope. And so as we have examples of what God is doing that we hope spreads like wildfire in our church, those stories are gold. And so let's share them, share them, share them. Let's share them with our senior pastor, our lead pastor, our teaching pastor, so that they can share them. Let's share them with colleagues. Let's share them through newsletters. Let's share them with parents. Let's just share them far and wide. So that would be the first thing. The second principle yeah, exactly, Richard. Thanks for saying that. Small changes built around relationships can be the catalyst for change. And I would say the second principle that we've found that's so important is people support what they create. And so if we want to see change happen beyond our youth ministry or even in our youth ministry, then who are the people we can involve in making those changes? Who are the people we can ask for advice along the way so that they feel like they are part? It's not you who are doing those changes, it's we who are doing those changes. So that might be your senior pastor, that might be your elder or deacon board, your leadership team, a colleague, some key parents, some key volunteers, lay people, whatever it might be. So those are just a couple principles that I would offer. Yeah.
Yeah, those are fantastic. Um, Lynette asked about, we are really starting over from scratch. Our kids focus so tightly on their identity through activities and friend groups. What can I offer that will get them to see us as a place to grow?
Yeah, great question. So, Lynette, I'd see a couple ways to go about this. One is to really highlight how you're also going to help them grow in their sense of identity. And so, you are part of that question, those questions that they have that drive them so much. Another approach might be to say, we know that you all are really thinking a lot about identity. We want this to be a community that helps you use your gifts as you're figuring out who you really are. And so, in other words, lean more into belonging or purpose. I will say this, and this relates to the first question about how to bring about change. One of the things that we find is that churches generally do better with experiments on the margins. So instead of launching a new program, like let's first test something. So, if you want to encourage young people to be in small groups, Lynette, well, then maybe you start not like multiple small groups, but you start one small group. Maybe you invite kids who are kind of influential in the ministry to be part of that small group so that they can be advocates. 6 weeks from now, 3 months from now, whenever it's time to start sharing that news. So yeah, we tend to bite off more than we can chew with changes, and we're often better with some initial baby steps, and then again sharing those stories, and that creates a vision.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Nathan is wondering about social media. Is it possible to leverage social media to help students find identity, belonging, or purpose?
Yeah.
Or in person is the primary avenue arena for this to happen?
Yeah, when we have more time, that's a great question, Nathan. Great name, by the way. Our son is Nathan. When we have more time, we actually talk about technology and social media as something that both helps and hurts our identity, belonging, and purpose. And so I would say absolutely, social media is a way that young people can find their identity. They're testing out various aspects of themselves. We saw during the pandemic that social media gave young people a sense of belonging. It was a place for them to connect with others. It was a lifeline. And then social media is also a place where young people feel like they can make a difference as they're posting. In fact, my 20-year-old just told me this week that a friend of hers is starting a ministry to people who are homeless. And so she has self-appointed herself as the head of social media about this ministry, which I think is awesome. So those are all positive ways. Of course, the flip side is social media can make us feel left out. We see what everybody's doing without us. It can make us feel inadequate and not enough. We don't measure up. And it can also hurt our sense of purpose. So it really, just like most things with technology, it can be a gift, but it can also be toxic and harmful. So I would say use it, but keep monitoring it with your kids and ask their parents. Parents see so much that we don't see, folks. This is one of the things I didn't realize until I had teenagers, how much parents see at home. So ask a few trusted parents for their perspective on how their kids are being affected by social media.
I love that. Andy is wondering about the tension between creating content and creating space for kids to be safe. We're in a very content-oriented phase of technology where it's all about churning out these messages. So how do we emphasize safe space building within a group?
Yeah, great question. I think to a fault, we have equated content with discipleship, or we've equated content with formation, and even cognitive content. Like if kids can just learn, then they'll love Jesus. And typically that's not, that doesn't always work. I love what my friend Reggie Joyner says, where he says, a kid might forget what I teach them, but they'll never forget how God works through them. And so absolutely, we want to give spaces for those experiences. Having said that, as a parent myself, like I want to know the content that is happening. And so, honestly, I think we as youth leaders, we don't do enough communicating about what we're doing and why. So Andy, if I was your boss and you came to me and said, I'm struggling because parents want content and I want experience, I'd say, well, it probably should be both and. And so how do you communicate both to your parents? Maybe every week you send out a newsletter, a short email newsletter or a text. Here are the 3 main points we covered, and here were the 2 experiences we tried to give kids this last week. And here's a question or 2 that you can ask your kid at home. So, I think parents, a lot of parents, not all parents, but a lot of parents really want to know about the content as well as the experience. And so I would say you have the chance to make the case that both are important. Share about content, but also share about experiences. And then again, ideally, give parents a question or 2 so they can either reinforce the conversation at home or they can start the conversation at home. So it's a question they would ask before you gather with your kids and youth group. They can, kind of springboard the conversation. So
that's such a great idea. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask those if there's something that is on your mind. If you're writing one, I want to just make sure that you get the link to the survey. We'd love to know what you think about this experience. We really craft these with you in mind. And so there's an opportunity on here to say what you want to talk about. What do you feel like you could gain insight in? So I'm posting that link. And we also have on February 9th coming up a webinar on trauma-informed youth ministry. Almost half of students have experienced some form of trauma, especially after the pandemic. That was a traumatic event we all walked through. And so we are excited to get some insight on how do we hold that well and how do we lead well, knowing that that's where our kids are coming from. I again just want to thank you, Kara, for your insights, for being here, for being willing to share with us, and the way that you champion youth workers and the incredible work that happens in these youth rooms across the country. I'm thankful for each of you and the work that you do, and it really does make a difference. Tiger, is there anything you would like to add?
Well, because I got dropped off the beginning there for some reason, my computer died, but I just want to thank you, Kara. I've known you for a long time and watched you in your voice in youth ministry with both the books you write and the role you play and the research you do. And I've respected you for many, many years. And so I consider you a great friend in ministry. And thanks for being willing to come and share these stuff with everybody. I also took tons of notes. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate everybody who signed up. So we hope to see some of you in future events. But thanks, Kara, for being here.
My pleasure and honor. And Tiger, you should listen to the recording because I said some nice things about you at the start of this call. So you're awesome. So blessings, folks. Thanks.
All right. God bless everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us.